Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Even before we begin today, a song just dropped in my head. I think in music, and it's an old folk song. I'm talking really, really old, but I remembered it out of nowhere as we just began. The times they are a-changin'. That's the name of the song. The times they are a-changin'. And it looks like some change is coming our way based on a new administration, based on what was on TV and media last night. We're going to dig into some of those potential changes. What's law got to do with it? She is our professional of the year. She's a partner in a firm in New York City, Greenspoon, Marder, LLP. Her specialty is construction and real estate litigation, and she's back with us. Great to have her here. Carol Sigmond joins us on the program. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, Steve. How are you?
Knowing you and our gatherings in the past, I'm preparing myself for a lot of numbers, facts, and figures, flying after your research of even last night. Tariffs. Let's start there. Where do we begin?
Well, let's start with one sort of placeholder, important placeholder. Tariffs have a place in an economic package, and they have a place in a trade program. They can even have a place if they're targeted to achieve a goal. For example, Mexico has been allowing a lot of fentanyl into the United States. There's no question about it. It was an issue under the Biden administration. It was an issue in the first Trump administration. It's an issue now. If you were going to use targeted tariffs to induce the Mexicans to take more aggressive action on fentanyl, that might be a good idea. The Chinese piece of the fentanyl crisis is a little different. They basically don't make fentanyl. They make the components that go into the fentanyl. But let's understand that fentanyl is a terrible crisis in this country. 70,000 people a year are dying.
Yeah.
I mean, that's horrible. So if we had a targeted program on this, it would make sense. But a targeted program on fentanyl would not involve the Canadians. Less than 1% of the fentanyl that comes into the country comes through Canada. I mean, we seize more at our ports than we seize coming over from Canada. So let's understand these are not targeted. They are not short-term, they are not targeted, and they do not have a specific goal. They're kind of a little bit too freewheeling. So let's start with that premise. So let's talk about what the current tariff program would do, less the 30-day delay or 31-day delay on the cars, which was just announced a few minutes ago. So the Detroit car maker said the tariffs would add $12,000 to the cost of a car. The construction industry believes that the tariffs will add 5 to 7% to the cost of construction materials. And keep in mind the materials, roughly speaking, 50% of the cost of a construction project. Construction costs and delays could be increased because of the deportation piece of this, because 20 to 25% of the construction workers in this country are undocumented. So we've got the labor issue on the construction side as well. Groceries, the average American family may see a $1,500 increase in cost of groceries and other basic items at the grocery store and the drugstore. So we're talking about a major, in effect, tax increase on consumers in America.
Wow.
Be they car consumers, be they construction consumers, or be they just grocery consumers, it's going to hit us all. So that suggests and implies that we could get a slowdown. And there's talk of a recession, that maybe we're already in it because the consumer has pulled back because of fear. My greater fear is not just maybe some slowdown in the economy, which I have seen figures up to 2.8% of a slower than it was. My concern is something that a lot of our listeners probably don't remember. You and I are about to age ourselves. We're going to date ourselves again. Bad enough with the song. Now we're going to really date ourselves.
Here we go.
Do you remember stagflation?
Give me a year. Give me another reference point.
President Carter and his stagflation problem.
I want to say I don't remember, but I do vaguely remember.
Prices were going up, but the economy wasn't growing.
Yeah. Yep.
That's the fear some of us have, that unless the tariffs are more targeted and more controlled and more thought through in terms of their impacts, we could have some stagflation.
And if I remember correctly, was a kid during that time, or call it a teen. I remember unemployment was very, very high at that time.
Yes. Well, we are presumably going to be looking at an increase in unemployment simply because of the layoffs in the government. And if you look at the Washington D.C. economy, because that's where a heavy part of government is centered, they are talking about a substantial reduction in the economic activity in that city. So that city certainly could see some recession in Washington, D.C., and unemployment could be going up, which would impact Maryland, D.C., and Virginia for sure.
So you're giving us stats and numbers and scenarios based on these numbers. Where do you base a lot of this off of? The percentages.
So truthfully, I got Morgan Stanley to send me some information that they were producing on the tariffs. So I pulled that in. I have been following all of the business news, Fox Business, Business Insider, Business Week. I've been following all of this. I've been listening to the public statements of like the car manufacturer presidents. Sure. So I've been paying attention to what I believe is not reporting as much as its source data.
So I just changed vehicles and currently been going from dealership to dealership with a friend just to support them in the car buying process. Did I hear you right? Another $12,000 on top of the price of a car average typically?
That's what Detroit is saying. A 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada could result in. Here's part of the problem. And remember, the car piece of this has now been blocked for 30 days. So maybe it doesn't happen. But keep in mind how integrated the three countries are in car manufacturing. Something might be made in Mexico. Something might be made in Canada. Something might be made in the U.S. Maybe it's all shipped to Mexico for assembly. Maybe it's all shipped to Canada for assembly. Maybe it's all shipped to the U.S. for assembly. But you have these parts crossing the borders maybe more than once. And from my industry, the construction industry, the big trucks that are used in construction, among other things, they're mostly assembled in Mexico. The parts may not all be manufactured in Mexico, but the assembly is in Mexico. And how all of these are being applied is, that's where the $12,000 figure came from. It assumed these tariffs on all these cross-border transactions.
Wow.
Yeah.
So many questions here, but kind of painting a bleak picture or a picture of challenge coming our way. And I like to say I don't do politics. I speak in the facts, and that's why I asked you the sources. However, the tariffs, in your opinion, Carol, where's the good?
Well, I see two possible goods. The first round of tariffs, coupled with COVID, did change the supply chain for many things, including construction materials, and it moved much of it closer to us. So instead of so much coming from China, more was coming from the Caribbean and Latin America. So it was called nearshoring. And to me, that was good because it meant the construction contractors can control their inventory better because the stuff doesn't have to ship as far. They can get it quicker. So they have to store less. So maybe they buy less, maybe they store less. So maybe costs come down a little bit. So I thought nearshoring was a good thing. I also thought diversification of the supply chain was a good thing. There's also a sense, I think, among many Americans that China has used trade as a kind of a weapon against us, and that they haven't been fair. And all of the efforts that the various administrations over the last umpteen years, from the first Bush administration, Clinton, the second Bush administration, Obama, to try to achieve some kind of fair trade program with China, that's been tough. So the Chinese tariffs bother me a little less. Also, their role in the production of the fentanyl components, I'm not blind to it. So, and the periodic sort of attacks on our economy coming from China, and our computer systems coming mostly from North Korea. All of that I sort of park off to one side and say they are not a friendly party. By and large, Mexico and Canada are friendly parties. Canada has traditionally been one of our closest allies.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned the fentanyl issue and the Mexicans, and also, let's talk about the southern border of Mexico. If the Trump administration said to the Mexicans, if you don't want these tariffs, you keep your southern border closed to mass immigration headed for the United States, not the U.S. southern border, the Mexican southern border, that would make sense. That would be sensible. That would be a foreign policy goal that makes some sense, and that could be discussed with the Mexicans and made, and handled rationally. Because without tariffs, the Biden administration was able to get them to eventually close that southern border. So there are things we should be thinking about. I just think that it should all be more targeted and more strategic. If that's and that may be the word that's missing here, that some of what's going on now isn't particularly strategic.
So it sounds like in your mind, there's a place for some tariffs, but we have to pick and choose our battles in the direction we're going to go in. Your specialty, real estate and construction litigation. Want to go back to that for a second. How is that going to impact those industries if these tariffs take place?
The tariffs on steel and aluminum will hit the industry very hard because of windows and generators and everything that's made with steel, studs, everything that's made with metals. So the industry will get the full 5 to 7% impact that's being discussed. We do get some construction materials from Japan and South Korea and Indonesia, and I think one other country, as well as from Mexico and plywood from Canada. Plywood from Canada is going to hurt badly. That's another big product, and we get a lot of it from Canada. And again, we don't have a strategic reason to be doing much to the Canadians. I don't see any strategy there. I mean, I'm not sure what the administration's goal is. If their goal is revenue, they're probably going to produce a recession and not get the revenue they're looking for. If they had some political goal with the Canadians, which I don't see, fentanyl not going to do it for me. Just doesn't do it. There's just not enough in fentanyl involvement. Frankly, the Canadians are not the source of the heavy influx of undocumented workers. So Canada is just not a player in any of these issues. So I'm not sure how tariffing Canada works for us as a country. I get targeted, strategic, focused attention on certain policy issues with Mexico, but once the Mexicans, cooperate with us, maybe on the fentanyl and their southern border, maybe then these need to go away because we have other needs from Mexico. but we need to be strategic. And that's, I think, we really need to think about. We need to be smart.
Even within the construction and real estate industries, coming off of COVID, where there were supply chain issues, where you couldn't even get a door. It took times 4 the amount of time, if you're lucky, to get that plywood.
There still are supply chain issues, and let's talk about who's going to be impacted by this. The biggest impact is going to be in new housing, new multifamily housing, rental and to buy. And who gets hurt? The young people who are trying to buy homes. Who gets hurt? The young people who are setting up households and are going to rent. I mean, that's who's getting hurt by all of this. And I don't think that's helpful. I think housing needs to be a priority. If we were being strategic, we would be looking at how do we bring down the cost of housing construction, not, sort of random acts to make it more expensive.
It is a major issue in this country. And I didn't see it until I saw it. And I sold a house a couple of years ago. So I'm in between. I rent. I don't want to, but even in the New York area, it doesn't make financial sense for me to buy. And many people would say the same thing. But what do you have on the reverse of that? You have extremely inflated rental prices. And you also have a lack of affordable housing. And anything that is going up, being constructed at this time, the rents are astronomical, especially if they're near a transportation hub, railroad or, near a major roadway, or, I'm not too far away from 3 hospitals. Oh my gosh. You want to rent in a complex nearby? Whoop, they got you.
Well, and the other thing is, think about, all of the efforts the city has made for City of Yes, and then all of the efforts by the state to try to come in and support some of this. And City of Yes isn't having nearly the impact people were hoping. There are many reasons for that. The big one, in my opinion, is there just isn't that much space to do this kind of building. I think if you want to get me on one of my little rants, so you can put me on one of my little rants. And one of my little rants is the time has come to take a lot of these B, C, and D buildings from 14th Street North into the Plaza District and face the fact that they need to come down. And they're marginally used commercial buildings. They probably need to come down. They probably the zoning needs to be fixed to allow mixed use, including residential, and then these buildings need to be rebuilt. What can be converted, and it's not a lot.
Right.
And we've talked about this before.
And then you have the parking issue. So if you're converting it over to that, then there have to have space for people. I want to go broad stroking here.
Okay.
Hypothetical dreaming. I just put you in the Oval Office. What would be some of the things that your first, aside from the tariffs, we're going to put that aside. What would you change? What would you do right now? Anything stand out for you that call it a priority?
Well, I would revamp the Doge activities and make them look more like the government reorganization that went on during the Clinton years. So Clinton cut federal employment fairly substantially, but he did so in a fairly strategic and targeted way by eliminating jobs that were no longer useful through he allowed redundancies, he allowed people to retire and not fill jobs, he abolished jobs as they became vacant. He merged programs, he merged offices, he reorganized to make government more efficient. I would, bring in the computers. I would actually begin to computerize government. Think about what you could do. Toll collectors. Why are there any bridge toll collectors left in this country? Why isn't it all Easy Pass or the equivalent? I mean, there's a whole huge set of jobs that could be made more efficient there.
So let me make sure I'm detecting this clearly. In terms of peeling back the layers of government, i.e. Musk and company, Do you feel there is some good going on there?
In the way it's being done now, no.
Okay.
I'm very troubled. But I think there could be. I think if it was more, once again, let's go back to our word, strategic and targeted and focused, it probably could do some good. It probably do a lot of good. I mean, think about the State Department and what Colin Powell used to say. God rest his soul, when he used to say that his job as Secretary of State would have been much easier if he'd had modern computer systems. I mean, they're still working on DOS over there. Maybe the time has come.
Not still. That was then, right?
Yeah, I think they may have emerged a little bit, but
I haven't heard the word DOS in decades.
Yeah.
Wow.
Look at Social Security. I mean, the claim that you have all these dead people collecting Social Security. Now, I have two comments on that. First of all, I think it's unlikely that payments are being made to these people in the way that is being suggested. But number two, let me pose a question to you. So when I was a young teenager, my father passed away. And he was a government employee in active service at the time of his death, and he was a veteran. Okay? So my mother was alive, I was alive. There were veterans benefits being paid to me as a minor. There were civil service benefits being paid to my mother. My father's Social Security number was active for 54 years after his death, because that's how long my mother lived. And there were benefits being paid listing that number. Now, they were being paid to a person who was entitled to have them, but he was dead 54 years, and there was still money going out because the beneficiary was alive. And take children who lose a parent and they're minors. Those benefits are going to be paid until they're not minors anymore. So those benefits could be paid another 10 or 15 years, depending on the age of the child at the time of the death. And what about if a person with a disabled child dies and that child is on SSI? That child's SSI might be tied to that person's Social Security number until the child dies.
So do you feel
50, 60 years from now?
That whole uncovering of Social Security being paid to people who have passed on, do you feel that maybe it was inflated in terms of what's going on there?
I think it was based on a lack of understanding of how the system works, which is one, for many years, deaths weren't reported to Social Security. Benefits weren't being paid, but deaths weren't reported.
Okay.
Because it wasn't as easy to report deaths in the old days. Now, I mean, if a person dies and they're on Social Security, the hospital notifies Social Security the same day, and the benefits are cut off as soon as it's legally appropriate, which is usually instantly. And that's the way it works. And the banks shut the accounts down and won't take the deposit anymore. So the money goes back to the government. The government may think they're paying it for maybe a month or two before they figure out that their computer catches up, but the money is already still back at the government. So it reflected, I think, and reflects, I think, a lack of understanding of how this works, but also a failure to appreciate that there is money being paid out legitimately against a Social Security number of a dead person, because there are people tied to that Social Security number, who have rights.
Legally benefiting from it.
Yes, legally benefiting from it.
We are out of time. Oof, covered a lot today.
What happened to our time, Steve?
You know what? I look up and I double check. Yeah, we're definitely slightly over time, but that's all good. That's all good. A lot of information here. I appreciate everything you bring to the table. And we all have different political views, but when you hear different scenarios and different opinions, it kind of makes you think. You know, not that we're trying to change anybody's mind here, but I call it the camera angle. You bring things from a different camera angle, and, refreshingly so. And that's why I love having you here. If anybody wants to reach out, would you want to share a contact info?
Oh, my email address is Carol, Carol.Sigmond, Sigmond, at gmlaw.com. Feel free to email me.
Thank you so much for today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve. Be well.
You too. We'll be right back. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her?
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge?
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend?
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her?
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge?
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend?
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.